Hello everyone. Let's continue our discussion to the final term of this subject. So, of course, we are already done with the discussions on catabolism as well as anabolism. In this particular lesson, we are going to know or to um, determine how the body regulates metabolism, and also um, the way body integrates all of those metabolic pathways during fasting or starvation or during refeeding. Okay, we have already discussed this. Okay, believe it or not, you have already learned about the main points of metabolism. So, di ba, sa kadaghan ato, and then I think the first view of the metabolic map might be very overwhelming for you, but fortunately, you were able to study those. Okay, and then I think at this point, um, you have now a lot of knowledge about how the body works, especially in metabolizing nutrients. Okay, so as a review, metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions in the cell. Yeah, okay. So kani, actually no, maulagi to, overwhelming kaayo siya at first glimpse, bisag siguro katong pag-study ninyo ato nga mga topics, no, but later on, it wouldn't be so hard for you anymore to to review metabolism. It's because you have already learned that. Okay, so puhon-puhon sa sunod, if you pursue advanced studies or if you pursue medicine, at least na mo yun, dili na mo back to zero gid, or dili na mo, you mean, mag-start from scratch on reviewing metabolism. Okay, it's because heavily na-tackle yun nato siya during your undergrad. Okay, so of course we have two phases of metabolism: catabolism and anabolism. Okay, so yeah, recall that catabolism is converging while anabolism is diverging. Okay. So what is regulation of metabolic pathways, or how does the body regulate metabolism? So, sige, how do you define regulation? It means stimulation and inhibition of pathways as per cellular need. Okay? So, in regulation of metabolism, usually na ay ma-stimulate and na ay ma-inhibit. Of course, you know that anabolism and catabolism are antagonizing. So therefore, whenever anabolism is activated, catabolism must be inhibited. And whenever vice versa, whenever catabolism is activated, then anabolism would be or must be inhibited. Okay? So, it is especially true depende sa feeding state sa tao. So, say for example, if the feeding state of the person is surplus of energy because of increased food intake, okay, or usually kung increase ang food intake, then sedentary po ang lifestyle. So, what would you expect then for that person's metabolism? Of course, there would be anabolism. Okay, catabolism will never predominate compared to anabolism in that case. Okay, so the majority of the metabolic pathway of that person must be anabolic. It doesn't mean nga completely wala gyud catabolism nga kahitabo. It's just that ang mag-predominate lang is anabolism. If that's the case, well fed or unsa ni or overfed, di ba? That's usually the case karon, because obesity and overweight and obesity rates in the Philippines and worldwide actually, it has been increasing. Okay, so yeah, due to siguro increased food supply and then increased food availability, and tungod pud aning pandemic, no, nga dako gid kayo ang impact sa physical activity sa mga tao, mas nimubo pa gid siguro due to, due to the restrictions brought about by the pandemic. But yeah, um so inana ang case. But of course, if the case is underfed ang person, so you would not expect nga ang anabolism ang mag-predominate, 'di ba? Of course, since walay pagkaon, walay food intake or kulang ang food intake, then the body must do or must find a way para maka kuha gyapon og nourishment ang body, and that is through breaking down the nutrient stores, okay, or breaking down the macronutrients of the body, so that naa gyapon substrate ang body for energy and also to sustain energy requiring life processes, okay. And usually ang kakahitabo guys during catabolism is mag-produce yun og glucose. Okay, since glucose is what the body needs, especially brain, especially the red blood cells. Okay, so at this point, pwede na nako introduce ni siyang nga concept, no. So the obligate consumer of what's this of glucose is the red blood cells. Okay, nga naman, nganong obligate, unsay pasabot sa obligate, meaning kinahanglan yun nga ang ilang source of energy is glucose. Okay, the RBCs do not accept any other nutrient as its energy source. It only recognizes, it only accepts glucose as its source of energy. Why? It's because red blood cells do not contain any mitochondrion. Diba? Naato siya sa inyong case study karon sa glycolysis. Okay? Walay mitochondrion ang red blood cells. Diba? So, ang bisag gani nucleus wala, diba? You remember the structure of the red blood cells. It's flat. It's not actually flat. It's concave. Okay? And then, ngano man na para to accommodate the hemoglobin molecule. Hemoglobin is actually a very big protein, so that's why the structure of the red blood cells must be in that, must assume that structure to accommodate the hemoglobin, which is big in size. Okay, and also to accommodate with oxygen, because you know that erythrocytes, their main function is to carry oxygen throughout the body. Now, since red blood cells do not contain any mitochondrion, so remember, asa gani mag-occur ang Krebs cycle, asa gani nakasituate sa electron transport chain, di ba sa mitochondrion, or di ba sa mitochondria, di ba? So, since wala sila'y mitochondria, so therefore, wala'y may tabo nga Krebs cycle o electron transport chain or oxidative phosphorylation sa ETC. So, therefore, ang energy source lang sa red blood cells is glucose. So, red blood cells can only do glycolysis, but it cannot do cellular respiration, or it cannot do aerobic respiration. Okay? So, ang iyaha lang is glycolysis, then lactate formation, and then lactate is only converted back to glucose in the process called Cori cycle. Okay? So, maura na siya since, so therefore, di pud siya able to use fatty acids as well as ketones. It's because those occur in the mitochondria, right? So, kung wala sila mitochondria, then ang ilang choice lang yun is glucose. So, that's why red blood cells are considered the ultimate glucose consumer, or ultimate obligate glucose consumer. Okay. The other one that can be called as an obligate consumer, but medyo lahi ni siya sa red blood cells. It's because maka-adapt siya later on with the use of other energy sources. And I'm talking about the brain. Okay, at first, or sa normal nga feeding state, okay, kanang walay starvation or walay fasting, ang gina-use gyud nga energy source niya brain is glucose. Okay, glucose yun. But if for example ang person naka-experience of starvation, or if the person practices fasting, then later on the brain can adapt to the usage of ketone bodies. That is I already explained that no last time sa catabolism nga part. Yeah, so therefore adaptable ra si brain, mo adapt ra siya. But naagya pun siya baseline glucose consumption. So bisag pa unsa ni kanang long term ng starvation, for example 5 days na nga walay kaon, although mag-adapt siya og ketone body use, but manginahanglan yapon siya og minimum nga glucose level in order for it to stay operational. So mao na atong i-discuss later on no, pila to nga glucose per day ang iyahang kinahanglan bisag pa nag-progress na ang starvation for a longer time. Okay, so yeah, so those two tissues they really require glucose. So that's why later on, if wala na remedy ang starvation, say for example wala good food intake, so that would ultimately lead to death. Okay, and that's actually the one of the worst ways for a person to die, dying of starvation. Okay, yeah, although makasurvive na no for 1 month, some say 3 months makasurvive ta without food. Yeah, but beyond that, dili na gyud kay mahurot man ang ato ang stores. So therefore wala na tay energy, and then that would ultimately lead to death. Okay, so yeah, that's just a perspective no to start with in order to better understand or fully understand the following slides. Okay, so mao na siya guys. So yeah, so in that case no, kanang starvation or fasting, catabolism is activated or stimulated, and then anabolism is inhibited. But kung i-refeed na, kung naanay refeeding nga mahitabo after starvation, then gradually sad mo switch ang body from catabolism to anabolism. Okay, so many hormones in the body regulate the metabolic pathways. So although kabalo na mo ana kay na-discuss naman na siya sa last nga kwan, but more focus will be put on this particular video discussion with regard to the role of hormones in regulating the metabolic pathways. So metabolic pathways are regulated to allow the organism to respond to changing conditions. Every metabolic pathway has its specific regulatory enzymes and key enzymes. So kani sila guys, mga regulatory enzymes and key enzymes, they are usually rate limiting enzymes. So rate limiting enzymes are those enzymes that are controlled by the body, that can be regulated by the body. So therefore the points of regulation are at those enzymes. So kung gusto i-inhibit or i-activate ni body ang kana nga pathway, then diha niya i-attack dapit sa pathway, so that pathway can be regulated, so that pathway can be either activated or inhibited. Okay, so say for example we have glycolysis. So we actually have three rate limiting enzymes. Okay, And kanipod sila no, they also do the three irreversible reactions in glycolysis. So I hope you have your notes na kay wala ni siya diri sa PowerPoint, but yeah, those rate limiting enzymes are hexokinase, second is phosphofructokinase, and the third one is pyruvate kinase. Okay? So remember, si hexokinase asa siya sa step 1 and phosphofructokinase sa step 3. Then sa step 10, pyruvate kinase. Okay, so those steps are also the irreversible steps in glycolysis. So therefore, if the body wants to regulate, if the body wants to activate or inhibit glycolysis, it would attack either or all of those three irreversible enzymes. So if the body wants to regulate glycolysis, it wouldn't attack those other enzymes. It would only attack those three enzymes. So that's why they are called as the key enzymes or the regulatory enzymes. Okay? And yeah, maupod na siya ang point of target sa mga hormones. Okay? So di ba na ato yung mga anabolic hormones and catabolic hormones. So yeah, if for example, insulin, that's an anabolic hormone. So it would attack a specific key enzyme para ma-activate katunga or ma-activate or ma-inhibit niya katunga pathway. Okay? So mao na siya atong tun-an sa kaninga video discussion. Unsa didto dapit or asa didto dapit sa mga metabolic pathways irregulate. Okay? Irregulate katunga mga metabolic pathways. Okay? So anabolic and catabolic pathways involving the same compounds are not the same. Some steps may be common to both. Others must be different. This is to ensure that each pathway is spontaneous. And this allows regulation mechanisms to turn one pathway on and the other off. That's what I just discussed, diba? So naagin mag-predominate. So it's either an anabolic pathway or a catabolic pathway. So of course, if an anabolic pathway is upregulated, then catabolic pathway must be downregulated. So those two components of metabolism cannot occur at a great rate at the same time. So the one must be upregulated and the other one must be downregulated. So that's the concept of regulation of metabolism. Okay, so these are actually how the body regulates metabolism. These are the modes of metabolic regulation. So allosteric, covalent, control of enzyme levels, compartmentalization, and metabolic specialization of organs. So kaning allosteric regulation, okay, we will discuss this one by one. Okay. So all metabolism is regulated to do one thing, maintain the brain. So what are we trying to regulate by altering the flux of fuels through these pathways? Why do you think these pathways are regulated at these points? What kind of regulation might be taking place? Okay, so let me turn on my laser pointer. Okay. So kani siya, what kind of regulation might be taking place? So it's either down regulation or up regulation. So when you say down regulation, then that pathway is being inhibited. And when you say, of course, up regulation, then that pathway is being stimulated or being activated. Okay? So say for example kani. Okay? So I think diri ta magsugod no sa kaning diagram. Okay. AMP is adenosine monophosphate. And you know that if you add two phosphate groups with this would produce ATP, because you know that ATP has 3 phosphates. And since AMP has only 1 phosphate, then if you add another 2 phosphates, then this would become ATP. Okay? So an increase of AMP actually indicates that the body needs energy, that the body might be experiencing calorie deficit or energy deficit. So that's why it must promote, or it must upregulate those pathways that would lead to ATP generation. So para magamit ning AMP. So kinahanglan nga unsa tong mga pathways di ang kinahanglan para makaproduce og ATP. Kay sobra-sobra ni siya, usually AMP is increased. Okay, so that means kinahanglan na gid og ATP. So how does the body do what would the body do in this case? It would stimulate PFK, phosphofructokinase, and you know that this is a key enzyme or rate limiting enzyme in glycolysis. Okay, so the AMP or the rise in AMP or the increase in AMP would actually stimulate phosphofructokinase. So this enzyme would be upregulated, and what would happen to the rate of glycolysis if phosphofructokinase is activated? Then the rate of glycolysis would also increase. Okay, so since gina-stimulate si rate limiting enzyme, which is in this case is PFK, so therefore ma-activate ang whole pathway or ma-increase ang rate of this pathway. Okay, so that would then lead to an increased production of pyruvate. Kaya ni-increase man ang rate sa glycolysis, and then more pyruvate is produced or converted to acetyl-CoA, and then therefore more NADH and FADH2 will be delivering their electrons to the ETC. So therefore more ATP or more phosphate groups are added to AMP in order to generate more ATP. Okay, so since the main motive of the body nganong nitaas man ng AMP kay kinahanglan niya og energy, so kinahanglan niya og ATP, so therefore the effect of AMP would be, the ultimate effect would be increased generation in ATP. Okay, so naay tawag ani no nga type of regulation, later on atong i-discuss. In times of calorie surplus or in times of excessive energy, there is an increase in citrate levels. So what does that mean? If the citrate levels in the mitochondrion is increased, so ang effect niya ani is to inhibit PFK. Kaya nga naman, dagan mag-citrate, so siguro there is no need to produce more ATP na para dili masayang ang glucose. Okay, so therefore the increase in citrate would downregulate or would inhibit PFK, so therefore the rate of glycolysis would then decrease. Okay, so unsay mahitabo sa glucose kung ma-decrease ang glycolysis? Then it would be fated to either pentose phosphate pathway or to glycogenesis. Okay, so at least dili masayang glucose kay again kung taas ang citrate levels, so okay pa ang ATP levels sa body. So therefore para dili masayang si glucose, i-convert na siya sa glycogen kay di pa man siya gamiton karon, kay again okay palagi ang ATP supply sa body kung taas si citrate. Okay, so that's why mauna inhibitory ang effect ni citrate kay PFK. Okay, then of course if there is a lot of ATP in the cell, so ATP would then inhibit PFK, and then so therefore the rate of glycolysis would also decrease. So mauna siya. Okay, mauna siya. That is the classic example of regulation of metabolism. Okay, so kani siya actually, this is a form of allosteric regulation. So the first mode of metabolic regulation. So ato na siya i-discuss on sa allosteric regulation in the next few slides. Okay, but first ato sa i-discuss ang compartmentalization kay siya man day una diri. Okay, sige. So sa maning compartmentalization, it allows control particularly of opposing pathways. So, ang compartmentalization, the metabolic pathways are compartmentalized. So that means the anabolic pathways must be taking place separate in space from the catabolic pathways so that they would not oppose each other. Okay? So, say for example, citric acid cycle, oxidative phosphorylation, beta oxidation of fatty acids, and ketone body formation, these are all catabolic. And in the cytosol or in the cytoplasm, glycolysis, PPP, fatty acid synthesis, and purine biosynthesis occur here. These are all anabolic. Except aning glycolysis, no? Catabolic ni siya, but predominantly, ang ga-occur sa cytosol are anabolic pathways. But, naay interplay of both compartments, no? But, nganong inaniman ang design sa cell, nganong inaniman, nganong separate ang anabolic o catabolic para dili sila mag-oppose. Imagine kung tanan naa sa cytosol appeal kaning mga catabolic pathways, so there would be confusion in the cell and there would be a futile cycle. So futile cycle is that is just a type of metabolic pathway nga dili maayo because it would just lead to wastage of energy. Okay, so that's why the anabolic pathways are separate or are compartmentalized. Okay, that is separate in space from the other mode of metabolism. Okay, so different organelles. So different ang nasa anabolic, ang para sa anabolic, different ang para sa catabolic. But naalagi interplay of both compartments. So gluconeogenesis, urea synthesis, okay? Remember that urea synthesis partly sa cytosol, partly sa mitochondria, di ba? Yeah, but these pathways would not actually cause confusion or futile cycle sa cell. Okay? And also different organs. Okay? So not just different organs but different organs. So remember that the liver operates a lot of metabolic pathways, and remember that it's only the liver that can do ketogenesis and ketolysis. Okay? Gluconeogenesis is also mostly done in the liver. Some minor gluconeogenesis happens in the kidneys, but all the other tissues are not capable of doing gluconeogenesis. So, yeah. So, this is also a way of the body to regulate metabolism. Lailahi ang metabolic profile sa mga organs. So, further details about this will be discussed later on. So, compartmentalization allows control, particularly opposing pathways. So, pathways are controlled at a few key steps, usually the irreversible ones. Okay? So, as what I've said, naatay mga irreversible reactions. So, irreversible reactions only happen, it's either kanang unidirectional. Okay, irreversible reactions are never bidirectional. So that means if the body wants to produce D from C, then if this is an irreversible step, then this can only be accomplished by an enzyme separate from the other enzyme that would do the opposite. Okay, usually manggod unsa man to nga mga reactions nga reversible, especially sa glycolysis. So katong 7, okay, kay tulo lang man ang irreversible dito. So an example of a reversible reaction in glycolysis is triose phosphate isomerase. Okay? So, triose phosphate isomerase converts DHAP to G3P, di ba? Sa step 5. But, the same enzyme is also needed for the conversion of kung balihon mo G3P to DHAP. Okay? So, that's why in reversible reactions, only one enzyme is needed to do the opposite reactions. Whereas sa mga irreversible reactions, it only would take one enzyme. Okay? So say for example kani kung gusto nimo i-convert si C to D, kinahanglan nimo si enzyme 2. But the same enzyme cannot do D to C. It needs another enzyme, so in this case E3, to do the opposite D to C. Okay, but si E3 is the same with E2 nga dili pud siya capable of doing the opposite pathway. Okay? So therefore, duha yun nga enzymes ang needed para ma-interconvert kani nga duha ka substrates. Okay? So diha mahulog ang discussion ni glycolysis versus gluconeogenesis, di ba? So sa mga irreversible reactions, dito pud mag-differ ang enzyme. So say for example, sige later on na ato yung mga concrete nga examples, no. So ako lang to i-show. Okay. So the next mode of enzyme regulation is allosteric regulation. So what is allosteric regulation? So binding of one ligand influences the binding of another ligand to a different protein site. Okay, ligand is the one that would bind to the enzyme. Okay, so therefore the other term for substrates are ligands. Okay, so say for example unsa ligand ni pyruvate kinase, di ba si phosphoenol pyruvate, because pyruvate kinase converts phosphoenol pyruvate to pyruvate, di ba? So yeah, so allosteric enzymes are usually oligomers, no. That means kanang mga enzymes they have two binding sites, one for the main ligand and one for the allosteric ligand. Okay, say for example kani nga enzyme oligomer siya kay duha man iyang binding site, diri then diri. Okay, so the main the main ligand is actually kani si S, then the allosteric ligand is kaning si M. Okay, if the M is decreased, so what would happen? Di ba dili mo fit si substrate, ay yang shape dili mo fit ani. Okay, but if taas si M, which is the positive modulator or the one that would upregulate the enzyme, kay positive man, kung negative that's downregulate, di ba? So kung taas ang levels ni positive modulator, then this would this would cause a conformational change in the enzyme so that it would better fit all the ligands. Okay, so mao na nga kung daghan og M, which is the allosteric ligand, then mas mo better fit, so mag-change ang shape sa enzyme so that it would better fit or it would accommodate the shape of the main substrate. So therefore, the enzyme would be upregulated in the presence of increased M, which is the positive modulator, and it would increase the rate of producing the intended product. But if the positive modulator is low ay ang level, then the main substrate would not bind well with the enzyme. So therefore, no product would be produced. So this enzyme would be downregulated instead. Kay gamay ang positive modulator. Okay? So that's the main idea of allosteric regulation. Okay? So therefore, mao ni siya diri ang kakahitabo sa kanin diri katong gi-explain ako ganina. So kung taas si ATP, then ATP would actually, this is actually a negative modulator, okay, or a negative allosteric regulator of PFK. So tungod sa ni taas si ATP, ang shape ni PFK kay mulahi, in the manner nga dili na siya mag-bind with fructose 6-phosphate. So, walay ma-produce nga fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So, therefore, the glycolytic pathway, the whole glycolytic pathway would be inhibited. Okay? The same kung sa citrate. Kung taas si citrate level, so, since this is a negative modulator, so therefore, it would cause a conformational change in the shape of the PFK enzyme so that it would not bind well with fructose 6-phosphate. So therefore, no F16B bisphosphate would be produced, and therefore the whole glycolytic pathway would be downregulated. Okay? But opposite ang effect ni AMP, since AMP is a positive modulator. So if the levels of AMP are increased, then it would promote the binding of fructose 6-phosphate with PFK. So therefore, fructose 1,6-bisphosphate would be produced greatly, and then the whole glycolytic pathway would be upregulated due to the effect of this positive allosteric regulator. Okay, nakuha? So that's allosteric regulation. So naalang siya ma-cause ng mga changes sa structural shape so that either ma-inhibit or ma-activate ang specific key enzyme. Okay, allosteric regulation can take two forms, feedback inhibition and feed-forward activation. So sa feedback inhibition, guys, ang final product ang mag-inhibit sa prior nga enzyme. Okay? So maayo ni siya kay ma-regulate yun ang metabolism. So kung daghan ang final product, so it would signal the body nga huy sakto na kay daghan nang na-produce nga final product. So therefore, there would be feedback inhibition to the enzyme that is responsible for producing the intermediates, responsible for the production of final product. So therefore, this enzyme would then be inhibited. So therefore, no more final product would be produced kay na-inhibit man siya sa kaninga final product, sa increase of the concentration of the final product. Okay? So, yeah, that's there is a logic behind it. Kay di ba? Kung daghan nang na-produce, ngano mag-produce pag daghan? Di ba? So, kinahanglan i-inhibit ang mga enzymes that produces it in the first place. Okay? Ang bali aning feedback inhibition is feed-forward activation. Okay? So, kung daghan si substrate or daghan ng ingredients, okay, so that would really signal the body nga huy kinahanglan nimo ni gamiton. Okay, so how does the body accomplish that? Ang initial ingredients or ang mga initial substrates for that pathway would then send signal to the enzyme that is responsible for the last step nga huy kinahanglan ka ma-activate. Okay, so therefore kung ma-activate ni siya nga mga enzyme, it would then cause a chain reaction that would activate the whole pathway. Okay, so it makes sense. There's a logic behind it. Okay, kaya kung daghan ang ingredient or daghan ang substrate for that pathway, say for example, daghan ang glucose, so yeah. But wala ni siya gakahitabo sa glycolysis ning feed-forward activation. Okay? This would rather happens in kanang kuan in pentose phosphate pathway and glycogenesis, so that an increase in glucose would then be fated to do PPP or glycogenesis. Okay, so feedback inhibition. So, product of pathway downregulates activity of early step in the pathway. So, tungod nga daghan na ni nga kani nga product, kinahanglan na inhibit ang enzymes nga involved. Especially ang enzyme nga involved sa prior nga mga reactions. Okay, so that dili pa gyud further mo increase ang product sa final. So, unsa man tong example ani, kaning citrate ug ATP, this is feedback inhibition. Okay? Okay, sobra-sobra ng citrate na produce. So, sakto na PFK. Di na ka dapat mag-produce pa og additional F16 bisphosphate. So, therefore, magamit ang glucose sa other useful pathways. The other one is feed-forward activation. So, metabolite produced early in pathway activates downstream enzyme. So, usually, gakahitabo niya siya sa anabolic pathway. Say, for example, acetyl-CoA. Kung dagan og acetyl-CoA, then, example, kung anabolic ang mode of metabolism sa body, then acetyl-CoA would then be converted to fatty acid synthesis and to cholesterol synthesis. Okay? Yeah, so that's allosteric regulation. So what about kaning covalent modification? Okay, kaning covalent modification, diri mo sulod si hormones. Okay, diri mo sulod si hormones. Not sa allosteric, not sa other modes of metabolic regulation, but sa covalent modification. So, unsa di ay ni? So, in response to a hormonal signal, okay, an enzyme covalently modifies the regulated enzyme. So, one type of covalent modification, which is the most predominant, I think, in metabolism, is through phosphorylation or dephosphorylation, which can either turn on or turn off a target enzyme. Okay, say for example, a phosphorylating enzyme, usually ang gamit no nga asa siya magkuha og phosphate sa ATP usually. Okay, so kung magkuha kag phosphate, isa nga phosphate sa ATP, of course, ma-convert siya sa ADP kay kuhaan man nimo siya isa ka phosphate. Okay? And then asa na ipadulong ang phosphate? Ibutang sa enzyme. Okay? Then kani siya nga enzyme, in response to the phosphorylation action, either ma-activate siya or ma-inhibit. Okay? So therefore, kung magbutang kag phosphate sa kana nga enzyme, it's either kana nga enzyme ma-activate or ma-inhibit. Okay? So that's the main thought of covalent modification. So, i-phosphorylate ang enzyme so that ma-regulate ang enzyme, either ma-downregulate or ma-upregulate. And usually, kani nga mga phosphorylation reactions, this would be in response to a hormone. Okay? Dili lang phosphorylation but also dephosphorylation. So, dephosphorylation means kuhaan nimo og phosphate group. Okay, so it's either kung kuhaan sad og phosphate group, it's either ma-activate sad or ma-inhibit. Okay, so mao na siya ang inyong tandaan. Unsa nga mga enzymes ang ma-activate kung butangan siya phosphate or kung ma-phosphorylate siya, and then kung unsa tong mga enzymes ang ma-activate or ma-inhibit kung i-dephosphorylate or kuhaan siya og phosphate group. Okay. So two alternatives for glucose metabolism, okay, that involves the discussion on hormonal control. So lots of glucose, of course kung taas og glucose, nganong mag undergo pa gyud og glycolysis, nganong mag-need pa og increased rate of glycolysis. Of course, glycolysis must be inhibited as well as Krebs cycle and etc. Kay daghan na gud og energy. Okay? Daghan na gud energy. And then daghan og glucose. So therefore, dili na dapat i-break down ang glucose. Dapat ipadulong na siya sa anabolic pathways. Okay, so lots of glucose indicate need for storage or need for anabolism, energy for anabolic reactions. So therefore, the principal hormone involved is insulin. Okay, so that's why kung taas ang glucose level sa blood, ang ma-produce si insulin. Okay? Para lagi ma-lower ang blood glucose levels. So, unsaon niya pag-lower sa blood glucose levels? I-convert si glucose into glycogen or into fat. So, therefore, mugamay si glucose levels, ma-normalize si glucose levels. Diba? Remember, mauna siya ang function ni insulin. So, yeah, ato na siya integrate nga thought with metabolism. So, glucose level indicates stress conditions, low energy, anabolic reaction should wait, alternative fuel should be used to replace or make glucose. So, the principal hormones involved are glucagon, cortisol, and epinephrine. So, kung mubo ang glucose level sa cells, so, kinahanglan o glucose. Okay? So, that's why, dili ta mag-anabolize but mag-catabolize or mag-breakdown ta og glycogen or mag-breakdown tag proteins or mag-breakdown ta og fats so that naay ma-produce nga glucose. Okay, kay low glucose man so kinahanglan nga naay glucose. So therefore catabolism would be activated. So the principal hormones are of course the catabolic hormones, glucagon, cortisol, and epinephrine or adrenaline. Okay? Sige. So, metabolism. So, metabolic pathways are regulated and integrated. So, when glucose is available, result depends on conditions. Okay? So, kung ang ATP is low, so therefore, glucose is oxidized. Glucose is converted to pyruvate by glycolysis, and then pyruvate is converted to acetyl-CoA, and then acetyl-CoA is completely oxidized in the Krebs cycle so that more ATP would be produced. So therefore, mamitigate ni siya nga problem. Okay? So therefore, this leads to ATP generation para mawala ni siya nga problem. But if taas ang ATP, then unsay buhaton sa body, of course, dili na siya mag-produce og extra pa yung ATP. So, i-store na lang siya para at least kung manginahanglan ang body sa sunod, so naay glycogen nga makuhaan. Okay, so when ATP is high, glucose is not oxidized, but it is converted to glucose 1-phosphate and then to glycogen. Then some glucose would also be converted to the intermediates in the PPP, acted upon by glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, which is the rate-limiting enzyme in pentose phosphate pathway. Okay? When ATP is high and lipids needed, then glycolysis, then fatty acid biosynthesis. Okay? So yeah, if there is a special need for the production of fats, then mas daghan ang glucose na nga ma-convert into acetyl-CoA and then to fatty acids and then to fats. Okay? So, yeah, usually mahitabo ni siya kung puno na si glycogen. So that kung puno na si glycogen, then pwede na i-convert ang glucose into fats because ang fats nga storage ka unlimited. Okay? Yeah, so inana siya. And remember guys, kung amino acids ang sobra-sobra, then maura gyapon ang pattern. Unahon ang glycogen and then fats. So after a meal, blood glucose is high, of course. You would expect that kay naagod pagkaon. So i-digest man and then makaproduce man ng glucose. As may tabo na siya usually kung after eating rice, di ba? Rice is a starch and then kung i-digest siya, may mo siyang glucose. So glucose will be absorbed and then the glucose levels in the blood would increase. So that would signal the pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas to produce insulin. Okay? So insulin circulates in the blood and attaches to the receptors on target cells, and then receptors translate insulin binding into an appropriate cellular response. So the response would be to lower the blood glucose levels. Okay? And to utilize glucose. Okay? So either i-convert siya sa glycogenesis or kung manginahanglan ang body og energy, then i-oxidize siya padulong sa Krebs cycle and then to etc. So when enzymes need to be regulated, a signal transduction cascade is activated by a hormone. So the hormone that signals storage of glucose is insulin. So the enzymes that help regulate glucose storage, for example, glycogenesis or fat production or fatty acid synthesis and lipogenesis, are in the on mode. So therefore, ma-activate siya when insulin is present. So therefore, kung present si insulin, then the effect would be glycogenesis and then fatty acid synthesis and lipogenesis. Okay? But what if catabolic hormones ang present? Then usually, ang catabolic hormones mo increase kung low ang blood glucose levels. So therefore, ang ma-produce nga daghan si glucagon, cortisol, and epinephrine because these are the catabolic hormones and this would signal the body to do catabolism instead of anabolism. Okay, so kani bitaw no, these are the specifics of the mechanism no kung giunsa nila pag-induce sa appropriate cellular response, but do not mind this. Okay, para dili mo ma-confuse further. Katura akong gipang discuss ang iyong timan-an. Okay? Sige. So, this is the metabolic regulation in the fed state. Okay, so after kaon nimo, mao na may tabo. So, postprandial meaning after meal, so mutaas si blood glucose, mutaas si insulin. Of course, mao na ang response sa body after eating meal. Especially kung taas sa carbohydrates ang meal nimo. So, maubi ani ang glycemic index, di ba? Or the glycemic effect. Okay? So, kung nitaas kayo ang insulin, nitaas kayo ang glucose, then that food is said to be high GI. But if the food is, gamay lang ang gi-increase sa insulin levels as well as sa glucose level, so either moderate or low GI effect. Okay? And then, kung mutaas si insulin, mumubo si glucagon. Mao na usually ang scenario because these hormones are antagonists of each other. So, yeah, epinephrine or adrenaline usually mutaas ni during stress or during kung ang patient na ay chronic disease. Okay, so usually guys, ang mode of metabolism sa mga hospital patients kay catabolic. Okay, that's why mamayat sila. Okay, usually kung ang patient na ay cancer or na ay COPD or other inflammatory diseases, because inflammation would actually activate catabolism. Okay, so therefore ma-repress si insulin or ma-inhibit siya. And usually, di ba, naatay ginatawag nga adrenaline rush, di ba? May tabo na siya kung say for example, sa flight and fight response. So, di ba, during emergencies, and then na ay mga anecdotal reports no nga for example nagbaha or naglindol, ang dili niya makaya nga i-carry, for example dako kayo nga TV na carry niya due to insulin rush or due to adrenaline rush. So ngano man na, because adrenaline actually causes the body to produce energy from catabolism because it's a catabolic hormone. So kato siya nga energy must be the one responsible nga na carry niya tong dako kayo nga butang when in normal conditions dili gyud niya to mabuhat, di ba? So that's actually a form of flight and fight response, and you know that's also called as adrenaline rush or epinephrine rush, parehas na sila. Okay, so in the fed state, okay, kung nakakaon, saman, insulin dominates. Okay? During fasted state or walay kaon, then glucagon dominates. Then the effect sa insulin would be high glycolysis, high Krebs cycle, high oxidative phosphorylation, and so ay sorry, high glycolysis, sorry dili apil ang Krebs cycle og etc. Glycogen synthesis, fat synthesis, so anabolic. Then ang glucagon is catabolic pathways ang ma-upregulate niya. Okay, so kani for example, this is the stimulus. Okay, the stimulus is taas ang plasma glucose. So unsa may ma-release? Of course, insulin. And then mo lower si glucagon. So unsay function ni insulin? Increase niya ang glycolysis, increase niya ang glycogenesis, increase niya ang lipogenesis. Okay? So, therefore, anabolic ang mahitabo sa cell. Unsay mahitabo sa gawa sa cell, sa dugo, sa blood. So, mubo siya. Okay? So, that's why, mauna siyang effect ni insulin. So, na-integrate na nato ang effect niya sa metabolism and ang effect niya sa blood. Okay? Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay. So, kumubo si plasma glucose, then bali. Si glucagon ang mutaas, then si insulin ang mubo. So, ang ma-upregulate is catabolic pathways. Okay? And since ni taas man ang gluconeogenesis, so di ba gluconeogenesis is the production of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. And then since ma-breakdown si glycogen, so more glucose will be produced. So asa man to ipadulong katong mga glucose nga na-produce? Sa dugo. So therefore, ang mubo nga glucose sa dugo na-solve. Kay na-increase man ang glucose levels tungod sa action ni glucagon. Okay? And then, plus means upregulate. So, ma-upregulate si glucagon, then ma-downregulate si insulin. Okay? So, mahitabo ni siya during starvation. Yeah, catabolic hormone. Okay, so biological effects of insulin and glucagon. Yeah, insulin is anabolic, glucagon is catabolic. So, mga catabolic biya ni, then kani anabolic, di ba? Okay. So, unsa man ni siya? Okay. Sige, ato ni siya discuss later, no? Okay. Naapod ni ibalik ni siya nga mga pictures sa later nga slides. Okay? Yeah. Sige. So, maura gyapon kung si glucagon, then catabolic pathways ang mahitabo. Okay. Wait lang ha. Okay. Dili siya ma-discuss. So, i-discuss na lang nako to. Okay. Guys, kung unsay effect ni glucagon sa mga enzyme, okay. Sige. So, okay, kani mas klaro ni nga picture. Okay. Kaning green, these are the enzymes which are active in their dephosphorylated state. And kaning peach, yeah, color peach man nata ni. These are the enzymes which are inactive in their dephosphorylated state. Okay? When you say dephosphorylated state, walay phosphate group. Gikwaan siya phosphate group. Okay? So, kaning mga green, mauni sila ang mga enzymes nga kung makuhaan og phosphate group, mahimo silang active. But kaning mga peach nga colored nga mga enzymes, mauni sila ang mahimong inactive or ma-inhibit kung makuhaan sila og phosphate or kung ma-dephosphorylate sila. Okay? Sige. Unsa man tong mga enzymes ang kung makuhaan og phosphate group, then mahimo silang active or ma-dephosphorylate sila, mahimo silang active. These are glycogen synthase, phosphofructokinase, pyruvate kinase, pyruvate dehydrogenase, and then acetyl-CoA carboxylase. Okay? Yeah. So, um, mao na may tabo, guys. Enzymes or a separate enzyme would cause the dephosphorylation of glycogen synthase. Unahon sa nato ni si glycogen synthase. So, kuhaan siya og phosphate group. And then, kung makuhaan siya phosphate group, then ma-activate siya. Okay? So, daw be sir, if bali, if butangan siya og phosphate group instead of kuhaan, say mahitabo. Mahitabo is ang opposite. Ma-inhibit siya. Okay? So, therefore, kung active siya sa dephosphorylated state, so therefore, inactive siya kung ma-phosphorylate siya or mahimo siyang inactive if phosphorylated ang state niya. So, kung butangan nimo ni og phosphate group ang glycogen synthase, ma-inhibit siya. Okay? The same is true for these other enzymes nga naay green. Mahimo silang active kung dephosphorylated state but inactive kung phosphorylated state. Okay? Wait lang na ako i-check ha. Okay. Yeah. What about this? Kaning naka-peach nga colored. So, mahimo silang inactive kung dephosphorylated. So, what if ma-phosphorylate sila? So, bali, mahimo silang active. Diba? So, glycogen phosphorylase remains inactive if it is dephosphorylated state as well as fructose bisphosphate phosphatase and lipase. Okay? But when you add a phosphate group to this enzyme, then they will be activated. They will become active. Okay? So mao na inyong kuan ha, mao na inyong timan-an. So ako na siya i-further explain later. So this is covalent modification. It's either mag-add or mag-remove ka og phosphate group. Okay. So, dietary carbohydrate and dietary protein can be converted to body fat. Yeah. This is, i-discuss na ako ni last time, di ba? And then, dietary fat can be converted to body fat, of course. Okay. That is due to the action of insulin. Okay. Okay, anabolic man eh. So, increase in blood glucose, kaniyang may tabo. Yes, maura gyapon to, guys. Kaning ka mga kuan no, nga mga figures Na-discuss na ni, okay? So, I will leave this for your own interpretation na. Kaya kung masabtan ninyo itong mga discussions, then masabtan na ninyo ni. Okay? Ayaw na ni i-mind kaning mga basta na ay si AMP or CAMP, kaning mga adenylate cyclase. Ang inyuha lang timanan is unsa ang sa start, then unsa ayang end effect. Okay? Sige. Effects of glucagon in insulin on glucose metabolism. Okay. Naay duha nga enzyme ang involved diri. Si PFK and then si FB fructose bisphosphatase 2. Okay, kani si fructose bisphosphatase 2 and then phosphofructokinase. Okay? Sige, naani sila diri. 'Di ba? Opposite sila duha. Si phosphofructokinase is actually for glycolysis and fructose bisphosphate phosphatase is for gluconeogenesis. Okay, remember, 'di ba? Na-discuss na nako ni sa gluconeogenesis, 'di ba? Nga siya ang mag-replace kay PFK. Kay irreversible man nga step, so therefore duha nga enzymes ang needed. Okay? But kani mga reversible naman ni except aning pyruvate kinase na SAD and hexokinase. Anyways, si phosphofructokinase active kung dephosphorylated. But the same cannot be said for fructose bisphosphate phosphatase kay inactive siya kung dephosphorylated. Okay? So mao ni ang i-remember ninyo nga premise para masabtan ninyo ni. Okay. So para lugar ma-activate si fructose bisphosphate phosphatase, kinahanglan nga butangan siya og phosphate group. So butangan siya og or i-phosphorylate siya kay inactive ba siya kung dephosphorylation. So therefore, para ma-activate siya, kinahanglan siya i-phosphorylate. So that's why the effect of glucagon will be phosphorylation of fructose bisphosphate phosphatase so that this enzyme would be activated. And since this enzyme is involved for gluconeogenesis, then therefore the effect would be stimulation of gluconeogenesis. Okay? What about this insulin? Unsa gani itong effect? Unsa gani ito si PFK? Active siya kung i-dephosphorylate. So therefore, para ma-activate si PFK2, dapat kuhaan siya og phosphate group. So, ang effect actually ni insulin is to dephosphorylate PFK. So therefore, PFK would be upregulated, would be activated, and therefore, since PFK is involved in glycolysis, then the glycolysis would be upregulated if this is the case. Okay? Pero kani siya, guys, this cannot be done simultaneously. The one must be inhibited and then the other one must be activated. And if the other one is activated, then the other one must be inhibited. Okay? So, mao ni siya diri actually i-demonstrate, no? So, kung taas si glucagon, so unsay mahitabo? Kinahanglan si gluconeogenesis mag-proceed. So, kinahanglan ma-activate si fructose bisphosphate phosphatase. So, kinahanglan siya i-phosphorylate. So, therefore, an ATP molecule is needed so that this phosphate group will be added to the fructose bisphosphate phosphatase and then it would become activated. So, therefore, gluconeogenesis would proceed. Okay? But, since giphosphorylate man nimo si fructose bisphosphate phosphatase, then ma-phosphorylate sad si PFK. Okay? Since this enzyme, guys, since duhara ni sila, ay since isara ni sila actually, isara duha, okay, separate sila nga enzyme, but they are actually bound together. So therefore, kung i-phosphorylate ni mo ni kani nga, actually this is the PFK domain, maapektuhan pud ni siya. Okay? So therefore, kung magbutang ka og phosphate or mag-dephosphorylate ka sa PFK, maapektuhan si FBP, si fructose bisphosphate phosphatase. And the same can be said kung i-reverse nimo. Okay? Kay isa raman sila. Okay? I mean, they are two separate enzymes that are bound together. So any alteration would affect the other one. Okay? So therefore, kung putangan nimo i-phosphorylate nimo ang fructose bisphosphate phosphatase, then maapektuhan sad si PFK2. So since phosphorylation of PFK leads to its inhibition, so ma-inhibit si PFK. So therefore, ma-stimulate si gluconeogenesis, which is an catabolic pathway, and then ma-inhibit si glycolysis. So therefore, the two cannot occur at the same time, or the two cannot be activated at the same time. The one must be activated and the one must be inhibited. Depende sa gusto sa lawas, or depende sa supply sa energy. Okay? Or depende sa supply sa glucose. Of course, if kung taas si glucagon, so unsa may i-expect nimo, mubo ang blood glucose levels. So that's why gluconeogenesis must increase its rate. So therefore, the enzyme that is needed for gluconeogenesis, which is phosphofructose bisphosphatase, must be activated so that more glucose would be formed, and therefore low blood glucose levels would be normalized. Okay? Yeah. What if bali? Kung taas si glucose levels, ayaw sa ni ikuan i-mind. Later na ni siya. Kay sa allosteric man ni. Allosteric ni siya. Kani kay covalent sa ta. Kay naa may allosteric regulation diri. Actually, duha ka modes of regulation aga kay tabo diri. Covalent and then allosteric. Okay? Later. But kani, this is covalent kay hormonal man. Okay? Hormonal control man. So, kung taas si insulin, so therefore taas si glucose, and then therefore glycolysis must be activated. Okay, so that's why PFK2 will become active, and what's this, fructose bisphosphatase would become inactivated. Okay, kaya nga naman ang action ni insulin is to dephosphorylate PFK. So kung ma-dephosphorylate si PFK, then ma-activate siya. But kung ma-dephosphorylate si fructose bisphosphatase, ma-inhibit siya. So that's why mahimo siyang inactive. Okay? So, yeah. So, this can be quite overwhelming, but balik-balik ko ni mo ni siya, masabtan ra nimo. And masabtan naman ang thought, malibog ra ka, but masabtan ra ang thought. Okay? So, yeah. Okay, mo nitong akong ingon ganina nga kani covalent, then kani allosteric, because there is actually an allosteric metabolite which is called fructose 2,6-bisphosphate. Okay, such that kung taas si fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, stimulate niya sa glycolysis and inhibit niya sa gluconeogenesis. But kung mubo si F26-bisphosphate, then inhibit niya ang glycolysis, then stimulate niya sa gluconeogenesis. Okay? So, F26BP is actually a positive modulator, positive allosteric regulator of glycolysis. Then, it's a negative allosteric regulator sa gluconeogenesis. Okay? Yeah. So, maura to gyapon kani siya mao ni explanation. So fructose 2,6-bisphosphate stimulates glycolysis, that's what I've said. And fructose 2,6-bisphosphate allosterically activates the glycolysis enzyme PFK. Yeah. So therefore, allosteric regulation eh. Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate also activates transcription of the gene for glucokinase, the liver variant of hexokinase that phosphorylates glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, the input to glycolysis. Then fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is a negative allosteric regulator of fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase, which is one of the key enzymes for the gluconeogenesis pathway. So katong partner ni PFK. Okay? Nga antagonistic sila. Okay? Kani siya, this is regulator, genetic regulation. Kay kung mutaas si fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, mutaas ang gene expression for glucokinase. And glucokinase is actually the hexokinase version in the liver. So therefore, the glycolysis in the liver would be upregulated because there are more glucokinase formed, because there would be more genetic expression of the gene responsible for the production of this enzyme. Okay? Yeah. So, katura gyapon, try to understand this using what you have learned from my discussion here. Okay, masabtan na ninyo, it's the same. Okay? Sige. What about the other catabolic hormone, which is called cortisol? So, cortisol has actually slow catabolic effects, response to long-term stress. So, cortisol increases protein breakdown in muscles and fat breakdown in adipose tissue, elevating amino acids and fatty acids in the blood. So, increases glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis in the liver. So, in other words, guys, cortisol promotes catabolism and inhibits anabolism. So, usually, guys, unsay dahilan nga numutaas ang cortisol level sa tao? Sa tao, usually stress, not just emotional stress, but also physical stress. Like, if you have a disease, if you have a chronic disease, so usually sa hospital, ang cortisol level sa mga patients so kay taas, especially kung nasa sila sakit, or due to injuries, say for example, a fracture, or burns, or disgrasya. So usually ang cortisol levels sa tao is taas. So therefore, there would be catabolism of nutrients. So that's why ang medical nutrition therapy for that is to increase the calories para ma-counteract tong increase nga energy needs due to catabolic pathways nga na-activate because of the rise in cortisol. Okay? Okay. So, modes of enzyme regulation. So, katong ikatulo nga konto, ikaupat na discuss na itong compartmentalization, then allosteric, then covalent, then next is regulation of enzymes. So kani pwede nga i-increase ang mRNA translation or itaas ang mRNA production, okay, para mutaas sad ang production sa enzymes. You know that enzymes are proteins, so that's why they are encoded by the genes. So every enzyme is encoded by a gene. So therefore, if the body wants, for example, to produce more glycogen, so itaas niya ang expression or increase niya ang expression sa gene that is responsible for producing glycogen synthase. Because you know that glycogen synthase is the rate limiting enzyme for glycogenesis. So therefore, mutaas dapat ang mRNA translation or mRNA formation of that gene. Or pwede nga, kung gusto ni body nga i-decrease ang rate of metabolism of rate of glycogenesis, then i-downregulate niya ang expression of the gene that is responsible for encoding or for producing glycogen synthase. Okay. So, yeah. Diba bali lang ang glycolysis versus gluconeogenesis. But, mag-differ sila sa mga rate-limiting steps. Sa step 1, step 3, and step 10. Okay, remember. Okay. Okay, sige. Kani siya guys, this is more particular useful no kani nga thoughts sa discussion nato sa sports nutrition, but there is actually another source of ATP ang atong body, especially during high intense physical activity, like for example weightlifting. Okay, kinahanglan dapat og fast source of ATP, and that is being supplied by creatine. Okay, so creatine has actually one phosphate group. So during intense exercise or intense physical activity, this phosphate group will be combined with ADP, so that ADP can become ATP. And then since makuhaan man phosphate group si creatine, so mahimo siyang creatinine. And kaning si creatinine mao ni siya ang ma-degrade and then ma-excrete sa urine. Okay? So mao na nga usually kanang mga ga-engage og mga intense physical activity, na ay ko creatinine supplements. So mao na explanation. Okay, kay kinahanglan man ni siya for high intensity workouts or physical activity. So this is a rapid phosphoryl transfer, a rapid ATP generation. Okay, energy reserves during fasting. Okay, so na-explain na nako ganina nung during fasting, that's catabolism. So yeah, so the ingested glucose will be, of course, will decrease during fasting man, wala man ginakaon. And then glycogen would also become exhausted. Okay? So after one day no nga wala nagkaon, pwede nga glycogen mahurot. Okay? Or hapit na mahurot. And then the rate of gluconeogenesis would increase because this is catabolic. Pero moabot ang point no nga mubo gyapon siya kay mumubo naman ang supply sa proteins. Okay? Then ang ketone bodies would increase, okay, as the days of starvation progress. So grabe no, taas kayo ang ketone body. This is a ketone body, di ba? And yeah, so therefore ketones would become the predominant source of energy during starvation or fasting. It must be remembered nga ang fasting can be intentional, but starvation usually unintentional na, and mahitabo na during famine or kanang during walay food supply, so mag-starve ang tao. Pero ang fasting can be intentional. Oo, so depende sa religion nimo if fast, yeah, or imo ang lifestyle, or if ga-follow kag IF, di ba? So, ketone bodies are an alternate energy source during fasting. So, short-term fast, fatty acids are the source of ketone bodies. But long-term fast, like pila na ka days nga nag-fasting or starvation, fatty acids plus the ketogenic amino acids are the source of ketone bodies. Remember, there are only two ketogenic amino acids, the leucine and lysine. What about the other amino acids? They can be converted to energy. They can be converted to glucose because they are glucogenic amino acids. So, while leucine and lysine are converted to ketone bodies, then the rest of the amino acids can be converted to glucose so that ma-maintain ang glucose levels bisag pa walay ginakaon. Okay? So, that is the pathway of gluconeogenesis, di ba? Formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. Okay, so there are prioritizations, of course. The priority would be those obligate glucose consumers. So as what I have pointed out ganina, those are the red blood cells and then the brain. Then the second priority would be those non-glucose requiring tissues. So the rest of the tissues can feed off can feed on ketone bodies completely without using glucose. Kaya as much as possible si glucose dapat gamiton, dapat ipadulong kay brain o kay red blood cells. Kay sila ang nanginahanglan gyud og glucose. But again, katong akong ingon ganina nga si brain, pwede ra niya ma-lessen iyang glucose usage. Tapos i-increase niya ang usage niya for ketone bodies. Kay pwede man siya maka-adapt for ketone body usage. But si red blood cells nimo, kinahanglan gyud siya glucose. Di gyud siya pwede kanang magamit og ketones kay ngano man wa gud siya mitochondria. So unsaon niya pag ketogenesis nga wa man siya mitochondria. Okay? Wait lang ha. Okay, so this just show you the proportion of the body of elite marathon runners morbidly obese. I-compare lang, no? So an average male has 20% of 20% of their body weight is fats or triglycerides. For an average female, that's 25% because I have already discussed to you that mas taas yun ang fat content sa babae kaysa sa lalaki. But sa katong mga morbidly obese, grabe na gid ang composition sa fats. 60%. As much as 60% of the body weight is due to fat. Pero katong mga physically active, katong mga elite nga mga athletes, it can be as low as 5% of their body weight is triglycerides because the rest pwede sa is attributed by increased water content and increased protein mass, okay, sa muscles. Okay, so mauna ang mga atong mga naay muscles kay gym, okay, mas lower pa ang ilahang body fat compared to an average person. The brain consumes 120 grams of glucose daily, and the red blood cells consume 20 grams of glucose daily. But this can be reduced up to 70%. So pilang 70% sa 120, then i-minus aning 120. Mauna lang na ayang i-consume in the long-term fast, okay, kay the rest of its needs can be provided by the ketone bodies. Kaya again, adaptable man ni si brain sa ketones. But kani si red blood cells, inani constant ra gyud ni. Bisag pa mag-unsa pa kadiha, bisag taas na kayo na nga time nga wa ka nagkaon, 20 grams yun yapon iyang gamiton per day. So it would not adapt kaya wala ba siya mitochondria. Okay? So map of fuel distribution and usage. Okay? So para mas masabtan ni no, kaning nga mga black, blood ni siya. Okay? Then this is the brain, then the blood, then the heart, and then the blood, then the skeletal muscles, and then the blood, the adipose tissue, and then the blood, and then the liver, and then the blood. Okay? So kani diri si liver, since ang fatty acids kay pwede niya i-convert into fats through lipogenesis, and then pwede sad siya maghatag og glucose from glycogen through glycogenolysis, and through gluconeogenesis, amino acids can be converted to glucose, and then that produced glucose can be transported to the blood. And the same is true sa fatty acids. Through ketogenesis, so ang na-produce nga ketone bodies from fatty acids can be transported or can be deposited to the blood. So therefore, the liver can give off its nutrients to the other tissues. So therefore, si liver ang mag-save nimo. Siya actually ang pinakadako nga role during fasting and during starvation. Siya actually ang mag-nourish sa rest of the body cells. Kaya nga no, during starvation, siya ra ang makaproduce og ketone bodies. Okay? Then, during starvation sad or during fasting sad, most of the gluconeogenesis happens in the liver. So, ang na-produce niya nga glucose from amino acids, actually ihatag na niya sa other tissues. So, siya ang pinaka-generous during starvation. Kay bisag ang mga amino acids nga ihang amino acids, i-convert niya into glucose para ihatag kay red blood cells o kay brain. Okay? Kay si brain kinaamang yun siya kinahanglanon po niya glucose. Okay? But nigamay na. Pero the same, magkinahanglan niya po siya glucose. Okay? What about si adipose tissue? Ang iyang mahatag lang kay fats. So, during starvation, maghatag siya fats sa other tissues. So, usually, ihatag na niya sa liver. Para sa liver, ang mag-convert sa kanang mga fatty acids into ketones. Okay? What about skeletal muscles? Ano sa iyang buhaton? Mag-give off siya lactate. Okay? Through Cori cycle. Then, kani si lactate, ipadulong biya na niya sa liver. Kay si liver ang mag-convert sa lactate into glucose. Ibalik dayon niya sa muscles. Okay? So, ang Cori cycle sa liver rabaya. Okay? And then, the skeletal muscles can give off its amino acids during starvation. Okay? Kay sa skeletal muscles man gid makuha ang mga amino acids, di ba? Usually in the form of BCAAs, di ba? So atong na-discuss sa metabolism. Then heart muscles, sala. Wala gid siya ihatag. Very selfish si heart. Ang yang glucose para lang sa iyaha, ay ang fats para ra sa iyaha. Then ang ketones nga na-produce gikan sa liver, siya ang mag-consume. Siya ang one of the tissues nga mag-consume sa ketones. Okay, kay mo-adapt man ni siya during hinoon si heart kung during starvation, mo-adapt ra siya sa ketones, di na siya mag-inarte. Bisag pa wala na siya glucose, sige lang kay ihatag na niya or mag-giveaway na siya para kay blood o kay brain nga sila gyud ka kinahanglan og glucose. Then si brain, another cell, siya actually ang pinaka-selfish sa tanan. Okay? Kay, ang iyang glucose para lagid sa iyaha. O, kanis during starvation conditions. So, actually, during starvation conditions. So, mag-adjust siya, but manginahanglan niya pon siya glucose. Okay? Okay. So, onset of early starvation and glycogenolysis. So, 5 hours after the last meal when the glucose concentration falls down to 4 millimolars. So, pag abot lagi diri, hypoglycemia na ni. So, usually, may tabo na siya before 12 hours, so mga 8 hours siguro, after ka last nagkaon. But, dili ra ni mahitabog inani. Okay, dili ra ka mo abot ani. Kaya nga no, especially during sleeping, or after you wake up in the morning, dili ra siya moabot sa hypoglycemic effect kay naamay mga mechanisms ang body nga i-maintain ang glucose. So mag-breakdown siya glycogen para mahimong glucose. So, maintain ra gyapon ang glucose levels. But, lahi na ang istorya if mas longer ang time nga wala ka nagkaon. So, this is exemplified here, 1 to 3 days starvation. So, exhaustion of liver glycogen, maula gito, di ba? Kung moabot nag 24 hours, ma-exhaust, hapit na mahurot si glycogen, then the lipolysis would be increased, and then beta oxidation would also be increased. Okay, and then glycolysis would actually be inhibited. Okay, and glucose recycling, so co-recycle and gluconeogenesis from lactate, and de novo glucose synthesis. And this is also the time nga magsugod na og gluconeogenesis from glycerol and from glucogenic amino acids. Okay, para ma-maintain ang blood glucose levels. So kani usually ang metabolic map, no? So ang glucose nga gikan sa liver through gluconeogenesis ihatag sa mga glucose requiring tissues like brain and the blood. Then ang fats mag-give off siya og fatty acids. Okay, kay ihatag niya kay muscles para si muscles makakuha siya og energy from fatty acids through beta oxidation. Diba? Ang glycerol nga part, dili ni siya mo padulong sa muscles, ipadulong na siya sa liver. Kay glycerol is converted to glucose through gluconeogenesis. And ang lactate nga na-produce sa muscles, okay, nganong na ma-produce nga lactate, guys? Kay ma-inhibit si pyruvate dehydrogenase. Pyruvate dehydrogenase is the step before acetyl-CoA formation. Diba? Si pyruvate i-convert siya into acetyl-CoA by this enzyme. Diba? And then during starvation, guys, ma-inhibit ni siya. Okay? This is the effect of acetyl-CoA. So this is feedback inhibition. So, acetyl-CoA is a negative allosteric regulator of pyruvate dehydrogenase. So that if acetyl-CoA is increased, then therefore this enzyme is allosterically inhibited. Okay? Okay. Ngano man, nitaas gud si acetyl-CoA kay daghan gud nga fatty acids ang na-produce kay starvation man. So, daghan ang acetyl-CoA, so si pyruvate dili ma-convert into acetyl-CoA, that's why X. So therefore, asa lugar padulong si pyruvate into lactate. Okay, so si pyruvate ma-convert into lactate. So therefore, dili lang nga during anaerobic conditions ma-convert si pyruvate to lactate, but also during starvation. Okay? Kay si pyruvate dehydrogenase ma-inhibit man, and then the enzyme that produces lactate from pyruvate, which is actually lactate dehydrogenase, is activated by an increase in acetyl-CoA. Okay? This is also done kay ngano man. Para si acetyl-CoA, later on, kung ma-pursue pag yun si starvation, ma-convert into ketone bodies. Kay remember, mugamay baya ang mga intermediate sa Krebs cycle, kay kaning mga intermediate sa Krebs cycle i-convert into glucose through gluconeogenesis, di ba? So therefore, si Krebs cycle nimo ma-inhibit. Okay? So mao na pasabot aning fatty acid induced inhibition of glucose oxidation. Ma-inhibit si glycolysis due to inhibition of pyruvate dehydrogenase. Okay? Due to the action of fatty acids in the form of acetyl-CoA. Okay. O glucose pag yun iyang gina-consume sa kaninga time. But established starvation after 3 days, usually mutaas si ketogenesis and ketone oxidation. So, mo-adapt na si brain. So, si KB, pwede na siya gamiton ni brain. So, si ketone bodies, ma-convert into acetyl-CoA, and then si acetyl-CoA ipadulong sa Krebs cycle, okay, to form for the energy. And then wala nagagamit og glucose si skeletal muscles actually. Ketone bodies na siya ga-rely. Okay? And then ang mga amino acids AA, ang mga amino acids, i-convert na siya into glucose. And glucose is used by the red blood cells. And then wala lang diri gibutang, no? But glucose can also be used by the brain, but gamay na lang iyang ginagamit kay mag-adjust man siya. Okay? Yeah, so mo nang may tabo, guys. Okay? So loss of total protein mass kay ma-convert naman ang mga amino acids into glucose para ma-remain yapon sa normal nga glucose levels ang body. Okay? And then para makaproduce pud og additional ketone bodies from lysine and leucine, di ba? Yeah. During refeeding, ang idea is i-replenish ang stores. So unahon i-replenish is glycogen, since exhausted naman yun kaayo ang mga storage, kay especially kung longer na starvation, no, so mas empty ang storage for the nutrients. So unahon po noon actually isang glycogen, aya na dayon tong mga fats nga na exhaust. Okay, so mauna siya ang order sa refeeding. Okay, and then this one, as the days of fasting progress, so does the level of urinary nitrogen excretion. This signifies nga gakamubo na gyud ang supply sa amino acids, kay gaka-decrease ang urea nga na-produce sa urine as the days of fasting progress. Hangtod nga mubo na gyud ni kaayo, and then dili na siya ma-sustain sa body, then death would imminently follow. Okay? So, mauna na-integrate na nato ang metabolism depende sa fed state sa tao. And then, na-regulate na sad nato ang metabolism. Okay, so questions will be, of course, will be sent to the GC for clarification. Okay? So that's all for this topic, and thank you.